Hello, 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 class. What is going on? This is Dr. Mayo here. Office hours call for week 3 of sports nutrition. It's moving along really fast, and I know some of you have been getting a few emails from students, and it is moving fast, and I understand that. But just know, do the best you can, and let the chips fall where they may. So we have finished our first exam and we have moved on. At this point in the semester, we're at the halfway point, to be quite honest. And so we've covered carbohydrate. You should be studying protein right now and the needs of protein before, during, and after exercise. And then on Friday, we'll look at fat. And so if we were to go back, and so the goal of this little live here is to, we'll kind of look at some of the key points. And I don't have any notes. We'll see if anyone jumps on here live. But as always, you can reach out and I can help you one-on-one. And I have done that with a few students. But let's talk about, so we got into on Monday and Tuesday, first couple of days, we talked about carbohydrates. What do you need to know? Well, you obviously need to know the basics, right? Carbohydrates, their main job is to provide the body with energy. So that's important during exercise. So then when you look at how many calories should be coming from carbohydrate, just know that the more an athlete is active, the more carbohydrate calories they can consume. Because again, that's the focus. If you got people that you might be working with nutritionally that they're not active, they're sedentary, then you could probably get away with consuming less carbohydrate. We know that in general, it's anywhere from 45 to 65% of our calories should be coming from carbohydrate. Could it be lower than that if you got somebody who's super sedentary? Absolutely. But that's the general recommendation. Now, when we look at one of the things that we introduced in this chapter around carbohydrates is the way that we do it as registered dietitians. We can calculate the calorie needs through the equations, which we will do on the next exam, but you can also calculate carbohydrate calories through what are called grams per kilogram of body weight. And oftentimes this is the way we do it. So these are numbers that you need to know for an exam. You need to know 45 to 65% of calories from carbohydrate. You need to know 10 to 35% calories from protein and 20 to 35% of calories from fat. You need to know, when we look at the carbohydrate chapter, that the range is anywhere from 3 to 12 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. I'll say that again, 3 to 12. It's a wide range. In the notes in the chapter, I usually will do a general recommendation and say 6 to 10, but just know that 10 grams of carbohydrate is way too much for most of us. 50, 60, 70% of us. Okay, you've got to be exercising a lot. And if I had you in a face-to-face class, what we would do is on a piece of paper, I would have you calculate this for yourself just to show you how many calories from carbohydrate that is. 10 grams per kg is a lot. Okay, it's really high. So most what you're going to see in the book, and I try to point this out, is that most strength and power athletes will need somewhere between 5 to 7 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. All right, so just know that. And if you got someone who's trying to lose weight, then they need to be closer to 3 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. And I show you how to calculate this. It's pretty simple to do. And this is where we use what I call my swag method, where I laugh at this in class, where there's some science in there, but it's swag. You can write this down, SWAG, scientific wild ass guess is what we're doing. You're using your experience, you're using your knowledge to do the best guess. Because again, just like calculating calorie needs through the equations, this approach is the same idea. Is that you're trying to get a starting point for your athlete, and typically that's the way we would do it. Is we would start with how many grams per kg of carbohydrate do they need, how many grams per kg of protein do they need, how many grams per kg of fat do they need, and we go from there. All right. Uh, and you can double check. You can use the equations to double check your grams per kg, and just know that it's a pretty simple way to do this, in that if you know somebody has a certain body weight, you divide that by 2.2. If it's in pounds, you divide that by 2.2 to get it into kilograms. And by the way, that's a good point. On the exam, which is coming up, the exam will open on Sunday at noon and close on Monday at midnight. I will give you the equations. You will have to do calculations on the exam, but you also have to know these recommendations around grams per kilogram of body weight, whether it be, the daily range, which is what we're talking about here for carbohydrate, 3 to 12, or how much athletes need before, during, and after, right? And when we look at guidelines before exercise around carbohydrate, those are the guidelines about, don't eat anything with fat, don't eat anything with fiber, you don't want to limit that. All of these guidelines that you see in the first part of that chapter around what should you eat, how many calories do you need before. It's not as many as you think, but you do need calories, and the timing of that is important. And then during, you get into, okay, if it's under an hour, I'm giving you the things you need to know. If it's under an hour, you don't need much, or up to 30 grams. If it's say an hour to 2 hours, which is what oftentimes athletes will be in that range, then you'll need 30 to 60. And anything over a couple hours, then you could always go up to, the more's better, as long as you can handle it with your stomach. It takes practice, but to limit the GI distress. So you could get that's where they come up with the 90 grams. Okay, you could, in some books, and even maybe my notes, I put it like 110 grams. But just know that that's 400 calories of carbohydrate an hour. That's a lot. And then you also have the guideline post-exercise. And this is why, as you were working through your carb case study, the first one, was a little subjective around Megan, the soccer player, but the one at the bottom, the one about Justin, the weightlifter, you needed to calculate how many grams of carbohydrate he needed and how many grams of protein. And some of you didn't do that. And if you didn't, there's a good chance that you missed that question, because the correct answer for that was no, the recovery shake's not adequate, and he probably shouldn't be doing it. Or if some of you maybe said he could do it, but then you need to add in, you need to take away a little bit of the protein and add in the carbohydrate. It needs to be modified. And I took that answer. Okay. And then I'm just briefly going through these. And then when you look at protein, understand the basics around protein, understand, there's really still not a lot of good science around the idea that you need protein before your exercise. The biggest bang for your buck with protein is post-exercise. And usually there's a maximal dose around 30 grams, depends on how big you are. If you're a big football lineman, then you definitely need more protein, but there's a maximum amount you can use. So just be aware of that. And then the other piece to the protein is you need to know that, hey, the DRI, the RDA for protein for sedentary people is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. For, say, a recreational athlete, it may be 1. And if you start getting into more like endurance, it starts at like 1.2, can go all the way up to around 2-ish. As far as that goes, 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And then for strength and power athletes, it starts at around 1.5 grams and it can go up to like 2, maybe even 2.5. It can go a little higher, but you need to be able to calculate that. So if I'm Johnny is a competitive power lifter. How much protein does he need? Well, then you need to be able to take his body weight in pounds, get it into kilograms, and know that how to calculate that. So if I go 1.5 or if I go 2, what that number looks like. And on the test, oftentimes I will give you the number I want you to use to do these calculations, or what you might see is that you've got multiple choice answers and you need to work backwards because I give you the answer. And so you need to take that based on what I've given you to see how many grams per kilogram of body weight is that, and is that realistic? So hope that helps. And then with fat, just realize that, hey, we don't really use fat. We use it during exercise, but you shouldn't really be consuming it. You really shouldn't be consuming protein during exercise either. So it kind of keeps that simple. But the big recommendation around fat is a daily amount, right? And it's a minimum, usually around 1 gram of fat per kilogram of body weight. You could do way more if your exercise is a lot. You're going to need way more calories. But in general, somewhere around that 1 gram range. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to, let's see if I can share my screen because I want to look at this. Let's see if I can do this, if it's going to allow me to share what I want to share. Let me see if I can find this may take a second. Okay, let's see. I think I got it now. So I'm going to share. So what you should be seeing is this carbohydrate protein case study. Now the protein carbohydrate case study is due on Sunday night when we open the exam at noon. Your quizzes, so don't forget your quizzes. And I hope that this is sharing the whole screen. So what you see is, and I give you this, and I'm saying, okay, Matt's, and the same thing applies for a quiz or a test. They calculate Matt's calorie needs. I'm always talking about the total calorie needs, not just metabolic rate. Some of you on assignments like this, but I want you to calculate the whole thing. And I even give you that because I say, let's say Matt has an activity factor of 1.6. Thermal effect of food. So if I look at this, so whoever did this assignment, I don't know whose assignment this is, but let's see if I can go in here and change this. So they came up with around 3,000 calories, 3,100 calories with an activity factor of 1.6. So what does this look like? And maybe I can just highlight this whole section here. They used the Harris-Benedict. One thing to note is Matt's a 160-pound baseball player, 5'11", 21 years old. I don't give you his percent body fat. So if I don't give the percent body fat, you can't use the Cunningham equation. So something to note. So they plugged in the numbers, and they came up with the BMR or the metabolic rate of 1820, 1821. Okay. But then don't forget, there are 2 other parts to this. So using the activity factor, that comes up to be 2,900. And so this is where a lot of you make a mistake when you're calculating total energy needs is all you need to do is factor in thermal effect of food. And like I said, some dietitians don't even do that because it's so few calories. But I like to, just because it's going to give your athlete a little more calories. It's always a good thing, right? But so if we look at that, then that's going to be, you basically take your metabolic rate and you multiply it times 0.1, and that gives you 182 calories. So you add this together, and this is where you come up with the 3,000 calories. Okay, so you should be good with this. Okay, you should be good with this. All right. And that's the first part. So if we look at the next part, and let's see what this looks like, then I ask you to calculate Matt carbohydrate needs based on grams per kilogram of body weight. It says, remember, 2 hours of training, it's recommended to consume 5 to 7 grams per kilogram of body weight. Let's use 6. So they've calculated Matt's needs, and they've come up to be like 436 grams. So let's see how they did that here. And let's see if I can do this. I'll highlight. So basically, they took his body weight. That's 73 kilograms. They multiplied by 6, because I'll put this on the exam exactly like this. I'll tell you what I want you to use. If you, on an assignment or a test, you don't use the number I give you, you're not going to get the right answer. So when you do that math, you come up with 436 grams of carbohydrate. And with that, to get the calories from carbohydrate, you just have to multiply by 4. And I'm guessing that's what happens here. Let's see. Yep. So how many calories should Matt get from carbohydrate? So that's 1,700 calories from carbohydrate. And if you look at this, one of the other questions I could ask you is that, look, this is 1,745 calories from carbohydrate. You just told me that his total calorie needs are 3,000 or 3,100. So if you do the math on that, that's right at about 50%. Is that within the recommended range? It is for carbohydrate, right? Because remember, the recommended range is 45 to 65% of calories. Oops, I'm not sure what I'm doing here. Hold up. All right, let's try this again. All right, I'm going to select this. And how many servings? And this is something we'll get into later. You basically divide the number of grams by 15. And I don't know that that's correct. 100, maybe it is. That's a lot of servings of carbohydrate. Again, I didn't vet this before I looked at it, before I pulled it up. Maybe it is correct, but that's a lot. And a serving is just a small portion, right? It's one serving. I don't have my calculator in front of me, or I'd do that math. But we can get into that later. But let's talk about the protein needs. I'm saying Matt's protein needs is 1.5 grams. Okay. So you do the same thing. You get his weight in kilograms, multiply by 1.5, and it's 108 grams. They need 108 grams of protein. You multiply that times 4, which I'm guessing is what's going to happen here. Yep. How many calories? So that's 400. And again, you could do the same thing. 423 calories divided into 3,000 or 3,100. Is that 10 to 35%? It needs to be within that range. All right. So let's see. How many servings? Okay, yeah, because what we'll learn and what you're learning in the protein chapter is that one serving of protein is usually around 7 grams. Like one egg is about 7 or 8 grams. 1 ounce of meat is 7 or 8 grams. So doing the math on that ends up being 15. And then there's a couple of ways you can do this as we get to the end here. And let's see. As I unhide this, when you're working with the rest of it, so if I ask you about the fat, you could do 1 gram and use that as a minimum. Or what you could do, if you've already calculated the total needs, you could just subtract. And that's what this student did here. So, and that's what I guess that's what I ask you to do, is just subtract. It makes it easier when you do this. So if you came up with 3,000 total and you need 400 something from protein, you need 1,700 from carbohydrate, that leaves you with 900 calories or something like that, depending on how you keep in your calculator, around 900 calories of fat. Question is, how many grams is that? That's one of the things that, these are types of questions I could ask. And this is just the example that I gave you. And I always try to give you an example when we're doing these types of things. So hopefully that helps. But you should be able to, like if it says 928 grams of fat, you should be able to tell me 928 calories from fat. How many grams is that, right? You're going to divide that by 9, and that's going to get you the number of grams. So I'm going to stop sharing. Hope that was helpful. Me walking through, basically giving you the answers to your assignment. I do that a lot. Any questions? So I've got a couple of you. Yeah, so that's a good question. Giselle asked around the idea of BMR, RMR, REE. Yes, they are technically different, but we just use them interchangeably. So BMR stands for basal metabolic rate. RMR is resting metabolic rate. There's a difference, or resting energy expenditure. So basal is the lowest energy expenditure metabolic rate you're going to get, and that's if I were to go to you. You spent the night in our lab, and you slept in our lab, and when you woke up in the morning, we had the metabolic cart right there, and we're like, "Oh, hey Giselle, good morning. We're ready to test your metabolic rate," and we hooked you up where you haven't gotten up. You haven't you hadn't exercised within, it's under a lot of stringent conditions, you haven't exercised within 24 hours, maybe you hadn't had caffeine within 24 hours, right? You're free, you're stress free, you just been relaxing, you've slept overnight. That's the lowest metabolic rate. We call that basal. Resting metabolic rate is what we typically measure. It's students will, for instance, we do this in the lab all the time, they've gone through their several classes throughout the day, and they come to the lab and they sit down or lay down on a table for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and we measure their metabolic rate. That's resting metabolic rate. You're rested, but it's not the lowest metabolic rate that you could achieve, if that makes sense. Usually it's a little bit higher, but it's close enough to not really be that big a deal. Okay. But yes. And so what you're also seeing is REE, and you'll see REE on a lot of lab reports. Like if you've looked in the Blackboard, you'll see it has REE when you're looking at, and REE stands for resting energy expenditure. It's the same thing. Okay, but that's how it's reported on a lab. Yeah, right. Yeah, no problem. Any general questions around carbohydrate? Again, or because we've covered carbohydrate, we're working on protein, and then we're going to do fat tomorrow. I'm just thinking about carbohydrate. How does carbohydrate improve performance? That's an important piece. You'll have a few questions on that around, the idea is to, you want to, glycogen load. You want to make sure that your glycogen stores are full. Remember, you got glycogen stores in your muscle and your liver, mainly in your muscle, but you do have liver glycogen stores. And when you run out of liver glycogen stores, that's in these endurance events, that's when you bonk or hit the wall. You don't typically do that in strength and power sport because you have access to timeouts and half times and all these different breaks where you can have ample access to fluid, not only fluid, but also calories from carbohydrate. Or even some sports, you'll even see them on the sidelines eating a snack like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or whatever it is, eating some kind of snacks or drinking Gatorade or whatever. You got plenty of time to do that. It's harder to get your calories in on the fly. But the whole idea is to, listen to me now, is to conserve liver glycogen. When you run out of liver glycogen, that's when you hit the wall. That's when you bonk. That's when your run in these marathons or long distance events goes from, okay, I'm feeling okay, to, oh crap, I'm walking the rest of my marathon, because we run out. And I go through that in the videos. So please go back and watch that and just understand that carbohydrate's going to be the key. And you could almost think of it as some of you who like to go camping, and if you've been camping, you can't just pick up the big old logs and burn them. You got to have a little kindling wood to start the fire, get it going, and then the kindling wood lights the big log. Well, think about the kindling wood as carbohydrate. You always got to have some carbohydrate in there to help work aerobically, so you can light the big log, which is the fat. And that's the thing, right? With carbohydrate, the amount that we have is in limited. We have limited amounts of glycogen or carbohydrate that's stored, but it's easier to access because it's right where we need it. It's in the muscle. Versus fat, most of it's in our adipose tissue. We do have some in our muscle, but it's less accessible and it's harder to, because we can access that carbohydrate through anaerobic sources too, right? Through glycolysis. And then if intensity is moderate, then you can take that carbohydrate on in and break it down aerobically. But with fat, you've got to do that aerobically. And it's less accessible, but we have, for fat, it's less accessible. We have unlimited stores. So, and then again, protein's not used very much, but it could if your event was a longer event. Any other questions? Been on here for almost half an hour. Any general questions just that you have around this? So we've talked about the assignments. Don't forget you get 2 opportunities to take the quizzes. The quizzes are open book. The exam is not open book. You've got to use Respondus. It is not my responsibility to download Respondus. I had a couple of you freaking out about, I hadn't downloaded Respondus, or you downloaded the old Respondus. That is not me. I don't control that. If you do have trouble with any of that, that's the reason you don't start to the last minute to start taking your exam to try to figure all this out. Contact the UCA IT help desk, and those folks are great around helping you to troubleshoot that type of thing. But that's not me. I don't control that. But just know that you will download Respondus. You'll go to Respondus and take your exam there. You'll see it. You can't go into Blackboard and take it. I had a couple students email me about that. Like, I don't have the password. Well, you don't get a password, okay? You do this in Respondus. Just trying to think of anything else. I think that's it. Know the recommendations. The test will be similar, except you will do calculations. So you'll have your calculator and a scratch sheet of paper. I will give you the equations. I won't give you all of the conversions. Like, I'm not going to show you and tell you how to convert pounds to kilograms. You got to know that. I'm not going to tell you how to convert, inches to centimeters and things like that. That's stuff you just got to know for a test. Okay. But I will give you the equations. I'm not going to give you how to go back and forth with grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight and knowing, I could give you how much, like, a 160-pound athlete needs 1.5 grams. How many is that total grams? Or I could also say, okay, Johnny's consuming 400 grams of carbohydrate and he weighs 160 pounds. How many grams per kg is that? See how I did that? You can go forwards and backwards. And then, is that within the range? Is that what's recommended? You think he needs more? You think he needs less? All right. I hope that helps. I'll call it. And if you do have questions, please reach out. Keep rocking and rolling. We've got just a few. Yep, we just got a few more weeks. You're halfway done. Don't give up. What we'll do is, once the exam closes on Monday, and even before Monday, while you're working on the exam, I may go ahead and start getting the next, because the next module 3, has more chapters in it. I will get all the YouTube videos up, trying to get those done. Everything's set, so when we get on to Tuesday, then we'll be ready to rock with the last few chapters, which there's quite a few. It's going to be water, vitamins and minerals, meal planning, body weight composition. So there's several chapters. All right, but hang in there, do the best you can, and feel good about it. All right. Talk to you soon. We'll see you next time. Bye.